Hi everybody, I'm Chiara and I hope you're all well. And I welcome you to today's presentation about Chinese foreign direct investments in Africa. Um, this is a really important topic regarding our globalized world today, but unfortunately it is often forgotten. Therefore, my aim today is to explain to you what exactly Chinese foreign direct investments are and why exactly China also invests so much in Africa. And I would say let's start right away. So in the beginning, I think it is the most important for you to kind of understand what exactly FDI are, to have like this basic knowledge of FDI, to later understand the conflict and problems we're going to talk about even better. So I chose this definition from the OECD because I think it's really suitable to define what FDI are. So the OECD defines FDI as an investment that is made to acquire a lasting interest in or effective control over an enterprise operating outside of the economy of the investor. So we have like different aspects in this definition mentioned. So first of all, the answer for the question, what exactly is FDI about? So we're talking here about investments. And I think it's kind of important also to understand what exactly an investment is. So the International Monetary Fund defines an investment as the purchase of more than 10% stake in a company. So we have company A that purchases 10% stakes or even more in another company or from another company, company B in that case. So company A has made an investment into company B. Why do they do this? They want to acquire a lasting interest in or have effective control over this enterprise or company B or business corporation, whatever. But they do not do this in their home country. Rather, they do this outside of their domestic economy. And naturally, the investor can be from a business or a corporation or even an enterprise, all these different kinds of stuff. So we have this investment that is made for a special reason to have this lasting effective control or you have a lasting interest in this company and you invest outside of your own domestic economy. However, FDI are not always the same, as there are also different types of FDI that have to be kind of mentioned. So you can differentiate FDI by direction, by target, by motive, or also by entry mode. And I would like to start right away with the differentiation by direction. So we have like inward and outward FDI. Inward FDI involves an external or foreign entity either investing in or purchasing the goods of a local economy. So we have like foreign money that comes into domestic economy. And outward FDI is a business strategy in which a domestic firm, so a firm from the home country, expands its operation to a foreign country. These outward FDI are also called ODI, so outward direct investment. And this is also what we are going to talk about, especially today. You could also differentiate types of FDI by target. So we have like horizontal, vertical, and platform FDI. Horizontal FDI mean that an investment is made in the same industry abroad. So a business invests in a foreign firm that produces similar goods. We have also vertical FDI. That means that an investment is made within the supply chain, but not directly in the same industry. And a business invests in a foreign firm that it may supply or sell to. And then we have also platform FDI, or also called conglomerate FDI, it depends. where an investment is made in a completely different industry. So in other words, I would say it is not linked in any direct way to the investor's business. Furthermore, we have also FDI that can be differentiated by motives. So we have resource-seeking FDI that where an investor is looking for resources at a lower real costs. We have market-seeking investments that are about to secure market shares and sales growth in a target foreign market. We have efficiency-seeking investments that seek to establish efficient structure through useful factors like cultures, policies, or markets. And we have strategic asset-seeking investments that seek to acquire assets and foreign firms that promote corporate long-term objectives. However, you could also differentiate FDI by entry mode in another country. So you could use, for example, greenfield ventures that are investments in a manufacturing, office, or other physical company-related structure, or group of structures in an area where no previous facilities existed. So mostly you kind of invest in developing nations, or you can also use mergers and acquisition investments, so that an investor buys foreign firms that have valuable strategic assets and increase the efficiency of the acquired firm. So you buy something and develop it to be even better. And this is the case mostly in more developed nations. So now I hope you have kind of like a short overview over what FDI are, and we can jump right into the more important things even, so we can focus more on China and Africa. But before we focus even more on Africa and China itself, I wanted to show you this chart with the graphs about global FDI flows to kind of stress also the importance of the topic. So as you can see, since 2013, we have seen more or less a rise in FDI with an increase in 2021 during the first quarter to maybe a new height. So you see that in general, these flows generate huge amounts of money, and for this reason are also very important. So yeah, and we'll have to see how naturally these FDI flows will develop and will increase or decrease in the first quarter of this year. And we also naturally have to wait for the results of global FDI flows during the third and fourth quarter of 2021. So, as we have seen now the importance of FDI and global FDI flows in general, I would like to talk briefly about the history of Chinese FDI in Africa, or rather about the history connecting China to Africa, because I personally think that this shows why China invests today so much in Africa. When we talk about Chinese African history, one can determine mainly three big phases of development. The first phase was mainly about colonial labor. During this time, slavery was abolished and therefore many workers were missing out. So for this reason, about 250 men were employed as immigrant workers. And during this time, investments mainly focused on plantation, mining, and also railway construction. Small but enterprising businesses already existed, and they serviced Chinese labor markets and undertook, even during this time already, small-scale exports of goods they produced. The second phase, and even more important one, was the one starting from the mid of the 20th century and was mainly focused on establishing political relations. With the establishment of the People's Republic of China and the Cold War, Political relations during that time became more and more important. Therefore, China challenged the superpowers through foreign economic aid to Africa in order to establish so-called South-South relationships and support the national liberation and independence movements. This was also stated during the Padang Conference 1955 in Indonesia, during which China pledged also to help African countries and ensure their sovereignty. To add to that, Deng Xiaoping's open door policy starting from 1975 helped also make Chinese-African cooperation easier and also more probable. During the last phase, the focus lays mainly on economical relations, therefore this phase is still ongoing. So as a result of the reforms I mentioned before, China's economy began to witness positive economic growth in the 1990s with an annual growth of 8 to 10%, and therefore, of course, China expanded also very much, and many Chinese firms moved into diverse African countries and branches and established businesses there. With the help of the Chinese government, which encourages and also supports these economical relations, of course, this phase is still going on, and we see more and more connection and also we also see a deepening of these relations between China and Africa. So one can say that in these times of globalization and interconnectedness, China and Africa have found an ally in each other. So now that we've talked about the history between China and Africa and their relationship, I would like to focus more on the actual situation and how it is in general today. First of all, we have seen that China in general has emerged as Africa's largest trading partner with the highest rate of FDI and granted loans. In the year 2019, we have seen, for example, a total Chinese investment of around 44 billion US dollars, which of course is a huge amount of money that flows into Africa and into diverse projects there. And furthermore, we can also see that between the year 2000 up to the year 2019, around 153 billion US dollars have been granted as loans, as Chinese loans from China to Africa by the China Exim Bank or, for example, the China Development Bank. These loans are very attractive as they are often offered at a relatively low interest rate, and furthermore, they have a maturity of 15 years or even more. Secondly, we have seen that China and Africa have established a forum on Africa-China cooperation going on from the year 2000. During this forum, often topics that are covered are, for example, the cooperation on investment, financial operations, debt relief, multilateral matters, so to deepen the connection between these two countries and also to have a basis where these two countries can interact with each other and also share their ideas for their shared future. Another important aspect is that today we see over 10,000 Chinese businesses and companies operating in Africa. And already in the year 2006, there were more than 900 companies settled in African countries in many different industries and fields. And we see that China is a destination for around 15 to 16% of sub-Saharan exports and the source of 14 to 21% of the region's import. So with these import-export, around 100 billion US dollar is generated yearly. So we see that there's also a huge amount of money that is flowing between China and Africa. And naturally, we have strong trade relations with each other. To understand the importance of China and Chinese investment even more, I wanted to show you this chart because I think it clearly shows how important China is when it comes to investments in Africa and investments in African infrastructure and capital projects. So we see that the government with 24.5% is like the biggest sponsor, the biggest investor when it comes to such projects. However, China with 18.9% is clearly just a few steps behind. So we see that this is really, really important, and that China invests heavily in these infrastructure and capital projects. Of course, this is not for all projects, and I think clearly there are some branches where the government invests even more, or some other investors are the biggest ones, but I think this clearly shows how important China is in general for investment. Furthermore, I wanted to show you this graph chart because I think it also shows well how China even surpassed the US in being Africa's biggest trading partner. What you can see here are Chinese and US FDI flows to Africa in comparison. So what we can see is that Chinese FDI flows have first surpassed the US ones in the year 2008 and afterwards in the year 2012 ongoing, while US FDI flows to Africa have decreased steadily since. So we can see that China has even surpassed one of the biggest and most influential countries in the world in being the biggest investor in Africa in general. However, I would like to focus now more on the reasons for Chinese FDI in Africa, as we've talked about the common history and we have talked about the status quo, but not really addressed the reasons why China invests so heavily in Africa. One important reason for Chinese investment is the access to a large market. We see Africa as a new market with many investment possibilities that is open to new products and Chinese manufactured goods in general. And with 1.2 billion people living there, of course, we have many consumers that would buy also these goods. So an investment is, of course, really linked to huge advantages regarding this market. Furthermore, we see that an investment enables also the access to natural resources, and this is really important because China's economic growth has increased its need for raw materials and in particular industrial metals and fuels. And as Africa has these vast natural resources, of course, this is a huge advantage for China because Africa has a huge export potential owing this to low levels also of industrialization. To add to that, in Africa, there are also many cheap labor forces because China, as it has developed steadily, has got more and more skilled workers that are even more expensive, and therefore China has to turn their point of view also outside of the country and produce where it is even cheaper, and this is the case in Africa. Moreover, China has also kind of ulterior motives behind their investment, and these would be to gain power and also influence, and first and foremost political influence to forge strategic partnerships to minimize security and political risks that the country is fighting. Therefore, these commercial relations are used to gain kind of closer political relations. A good example for this would be the UN vote regarding the One China policy, where many African countries backed also China's decision, because they of course make also up more than 1/3 of the UN. So therefore African countries have also a huge voting power, and therefore China uses these commercial relations to also forge these political relationships. And the most important reason would be in general to connect Africa and China even more in regards to the Belt and Road Initiative that China has published in the year 2013, which should improve connectivity between Asia, Europe, and Africa, and ultimately increase, of course, also trade and connectivity, development, and prosperity along these economic corridors. So we see also China expanding this Belt and Road Initiative with the help of investments in Africa. China itself calls these investments a win-win cooperation, and these investments that are based on mutual benefits. So we have technology and skills in exchange for resources and labor. And all this is based on a so-called non-interference policy, so that China just does business, and for them, business is business, and they even trade with and invest in countries which have an alarming amount of human rights abuses and undemocratic practices. But this is something that I will explain more in the following. So now that we have seen the reasons for Chinese FDI and that these investments are mainly made to create advantages for China itself and to grow their own domestic economy, I wanted to show you some project examples, some Chinese projects in Africa, and also how much they cost, so that you can see how much money is in general involved and which influence China creates also through this. We see that China in general invests in different branches, and for example, when we are talking about dams, there was the construction of the Bui Dam in Ghana's Volta River, which costed around 562 million US dollars, which is of course a huge amount of money, which was also borrowed from the China Exim Bank and the China Development Fund. So we see that Africa and China create dependencies based on monetary interactions. To visualize this founding even more, I wanted to show you this pie chart, which on one hand shows Chinese built projects and on the other Chinese funded projects by different sectors. What we can see in both parts is that China focuses mainly on the sectors of energy and power, transport, and real estate. This is for the simple reason that China, of course, wants to generate own advantages and gain something, of course, also from the investment. When we're talking about energy and power, China, as the worldwide biggest energy and power consumer, of course, gains an advantage when it invests in the construction of solar power plants, as it can use afterwards also parts of the energy as well. And also with the huge investment made in transport sector, we see that China wants also to deepen its development of the Belt and Road Initiative and also enable even better trade. Unfortunately, Chinese investments in Africa cannot be seen completely positive, as they also create some problems and have to face some criticism as well. One important aspect to be mentioned is the influx and dependencies from Chinese goods and businesses. With many big Chinese companies dominating the African market and creating somewhat of a monopoly position, we see that the entrance for small African companies to the market is therefore limited. This, of course, limits not only the development of African technology, own African ideas, but also in general limits heavily the development of an own strong domestic economy of this African country in which China acts. To add to that, China often ignores also alarming amounts of human rights issues, because it also, based on its non-interference policy, cooperates with African countries that are not democratically ruled, and therefore for them it's only about business, and not about the country itself, whether it is democratic or whether it is ruled by a dictator. So one can say that China also supports undemocratic regimes with the help of investments in their country. Furthermore, China also pays low attention or no attention at all to environmental protection, as there are often no standards approved when China invests in something, and China also acts without paying attention to international standards. Often Chinese loans also are not transparent enough, so that countries are often later on caught in so-called debt traps. So poor countries in Africa that are already poor and borrow money, of course, cannot pay it back. So that China creates dependencies between these countries, and in exchange for kind of relieving their debts, they pledge political support to China, so that China kind of, with this debt mechanism, creates political dependencies for its own use. And I think the most important aspect of criticism is the one with neo-colonialism. So we see that the Chinese act today like Western countries a few hundred years ago. They exploit and use African resources and their people, of course, also regarding cheaper labor forces for their own good. So China exploits Africa like former colonial powers like Britain and Germany and France. One good example to show you how this criticism and the actual Chinese foreign direct investments in Africa are connected is the incident at the Chambishi copper mine. In 1998, CNMC, a big Chinese company, bought 85% shares of this copper mine. This was meant to show how Chinese FDI can create new jobs and also bring new technologies to Africa. So they wanted in general to show how many advantages this investment would bring. Unfortunately, in the year 2005, there was an explosion at the Big Rim plant. This is a part of this copper mine, which killed 51 Zambian workers. The reason for this were poor safety standards, no job security, and also poor conditions of employment in general. As a result, protests emerged, and the rest of the African workers wanted to have naturally a higher wage, and they wanted also to re-establish union activity to fight for their rights. However, as they were demonstrating near the quarters of the Chinese managers, which felt under pressure, in the end, 6 workers were shot and no one was prosecuted. This also shows that Chinese investment exploits people and naturally can result in a tragedy like it happened in 2005. To conclude, I would say that on one hand, Chinese FDI in Africa can be really beneficial as they have helped spur infrastructure development and economic growth in general. And with that much capital assets involved, I would also say that Africa and China are probably going to remain strong partners. However, on the other hand, we have seen that these FDIs can create a strong impact on political relations, as these African countries are caught in dependencies and also debt traps, because of course, they want to develop even more. However, they are not financially able to do this without foreign help. But under these conditions that we have seen, China creates these political relations instead of only having economical relations with these African countries. Furthermore, we have seen the strong or alarming issue of human rights violations, also regarding, for example, the incident in the Chimbishi copper mine, and we see that China really exploits the countries. Of course, they say they want to help develop these countries more, but on the other hand, they use them mostly for their own good. The solution for all this, to kind of stay with only economic relations that are really helping African countries develop an own strong, independent economy, would be the implementation of rules and norms, so that even if there's a growth in Chinese economic influence, the ability to influence Africa's diplomatic and political landscape is still restricted. And on the other hand, also the work of NGOs should be supported to raise more awareness and also support a more transparency movement. So in general, I would say the main aim should be to pay back debts and develop an own independent economy, and to support domestic industries, and not to have extraction and infrastructure markets that are more concerned kind of with connecting resource markets to China than considering the needs of the African population. So I hope you liked my presentation about FDI and about also the influence of FDI in Africa. And if you have questions, feel free to write me. I would be happy to answer them. And besides that, have a nice week.